Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome back to Christchurch Daily. A short thought for the day to help us keep focused on Jesus. So it's kind of easy to forget that we're actually in the middle of Lent, and the idea of celebrating Easter, which is just 2 weeks away, is totally disconnected from reality at the moment. I barely thought about it, if I'm honest. On Friday I had a conversation with my best friend about Lent, and then at the weekend I listened to a podcast about Lent from a church called Bridgetown. They do a daily podcast as well, which is worth listening to if you've got the time. And in it the speaker was saying that actually, whether we're a Christian or not, and whether we like it or not, that the coronavirus pandemic has kind of forced everybody into a kind of Lent season. So Lent is traditionally the time in the church calendar where we remember our own mortality. It begins with Ash Wednesday, where Christians around the world recite words which are reminiscent of those that will be spoken over them at their funeral. So as the sign of the cross is made with the ashes on Ash Wednesday, the person presiding over the service says, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." So we're all of us at the moment confronted with our own mortality, and it is uncomfortable and it's frightening. I am mainly avoiding reading the news, and I'm avoiding looking at those graphs that map out, where we are on the kind of curve in comparison to Italy. I'm avoiding looking at the death toll because it's scary, and I spent most of last week actually feeling quite a deep sense of peace, enjoying the sunshine, enjoying being with my family. But this weekend was really hard. My girls' behaviour was quite challenging, and I think the reality kind of hit home for them, and probably for us as well, that something is wrong, and it's not going away. Perhaps I'm just kind of realising that for myself, that it's fairly easy to cope with 1 week of lockdown, but what about 12 weeks? What about 6 months potentially of our current circumstance? I miss people. I miss my parents. I miss my friends. I miss my church family. And I saw 2 people at a distance across the park today, and I was just struck by this overwhelming sense of loss, that you can't give people a hug, you can't be friends with people in the way that you're used to, you can't check in on people in the way that you're used to, your kids can't play together. And there was this kind of deep sense in me of loss. And however great WhatsApp and Zoom and Facebook and all those things are, and we are so thankful for technology right now, they just don't really cut it in comparison to really being present with people. So last night we sat as a family around the dinner table, and we were trying to talk about how we're feeling. That's kind of easier said than done with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. But Hamish and I wanted to be honest with our girls about the fact that we're finding this hard as well. It's not just them, that this is difficult for our whole family. So we tried to create this space for us to be a bit vulnerable and angry and sad about what's going on. And I think that is going to be really important in the weeks to come. So much of what we focused on last week in Philippians was about rejoicing, and the discipline of rejoicing is so important in the midst of what's going on. But I don't think that rejoicing is like some sugar coating of our grief. It's not something that we slap over our grief to cover it up. And actually, as a society, kind of British with a stiff upper lip and all that stuff, we're quite bad at grieving. We find it really hard to acknowledge that we're struggling and that something is sad and hard, and we're really bad at allowing ourselves the time and the space to grieve properly. So lots of other cultures in the world have very ritualized traditions surrounding death, for example, and what they do when someone dies. And I think in the UK we're not very good at dealing with people, or even with ourselves, when we're feeling sad. And dealing with those things is particularly hard at the moment because lots of the structures that we're used to help us cope have been taken away. So we can't do funerals, for example, in the way that we're used to, and that is really hard. And we do find it difficult, I think, to give ourselves time to grieve. or to use a more old-fashioned word, to give ourselves time to lament. And there is so much to lament at the moment. We are all grieving. We're grieving the loss of our freedoms. We're grieving the loss of contact with our loved ones. We're grieving this kind of insurmountable pressure that coronavirus is putting on our NHS and our schools and many of our key workers. And actually, just for us at Christchurch at the moment, we're grieving the death of 2 of our beloved brothers and sisters. And so there is so much going on that needs to be lamented. So CMS is short for the Church Mission Society, and they produced this really great resource called Only. I'll just tell what it's called. It's called Only with Eyes That Have Cried, Lament for Lent. And Hamish and I were journeying through it together, but we completely forgot about it in the space of the last 10 days or so in light of everything going on. But last night I picked it up again, and I just read this, and it says, God is not afraid of our grief. He doesn't cower when we complain, and he does not take our lament lightly. And that was such an encouraging thought to me this morning, as I just kind of woke up with a bit of a lump in my throat, to be honest, and just this sense of loss. And we believe in a God who is not frightened of grief. In fact, we believe in a God who stands with us in the middle of grief. We believe in a God who knows exactly what it is to lament and to feel sorrow. One of the prophecies that's made about Jesus in the Old Testament is in the book of Isaiah, and Isaiah is talking about the kind of person that God is going to send, and he says that he will be a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And the collection of stories that we have about the life of Jesus in the New Testament paint this beautiful picture of a God who weeps with the people that he's made and for the people that he's made. This is the same God who stands with Mary and Martha, this pair of sisters, at the graveside, and he weeps with them for their brother Lazarus after he's died. It's one of the shortest verses in the New Testament, and it just says Jesus wept. So we have this picture of a God who is moved deeply in his spirit when stuff is wrong with our world, and who cares about us. This is the God who, again, in Luke's Gospel, he weeps over the city of Jerusalem, this city that rejects him and that will crucify him. He weeps over them. And then in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is portrayed as this very human God who weeps for himself and for what he's about to undergo for the sake of a broken world in need of redemption. So I just want to encourage us today to be, first of all, to be real with ourselves and to admit that this is hard and it's painful, and to allow ourselves to sit in that discomfort and that grief rather than just cover it up with something else or turn on Netflix or flip through Facebook, but just to acknowledge that we are grieving, and all of us have lost something in the past couple of weeks. But some of us, we're grieving the loss of people as well in the midst, and that is so painful, and it's so right to feel that grief. But the second thing is to just take comfort and courage today that we're grieving alongside a God who is not afraid of grief, who knows what it is to grieve, and who promises that he will sit with us in our sadness and in our sorrow, and that he will bring comfort to those who mourn. So I just want to close with this today, which is a couple of lines from a psalm, Psalm 62, and it just says, "Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts before him, for God is our refuge." And that's my prayer for us as a church today, that we would be able to pour out our hearts to God, whatever state our hearts are in, that we would pour our hearts out to God and know that he is our refuge.